Welcome, everybody, to today's live session. We have a special guest with us, Morgan, who is going to talk a little bit about the Nurse Practitioners Program. And any questions that you have, you can throw into the chat, and we'll do our best to answer those. Go ahead, Morgan.
Hi, so happy to be joining you here today. I can always, if there's questions later on, or if anybody wants more information, that whatever I can help with, I'm easily reachable. But for what I can offer you so far, so I'm a graduate of Cambrian College from 2014 from the BSCN program. And from there, I didn't go straight into any further studies. I was fortunate enough to start working shortly thereafter in the ICU here in Sudbury. So I've been there ever since. And only in the last year or so, I decided that if I was interested in doing more school, I had to kind of get going on it, or there was a chance I, might never go back. So I ended up looking into the program here in Sudbury, which is a primary care nurse practitioner program. So depending on where you guys are coming from, that could differ depending on your location. So here at Laurentian, it's offered in the primary care stream, but there is acute care options like out of U of T, some different areas. So that can definitely vary. But what's available for employment basically in Sudbury, which is where I'm located, is basically primary care practitioners is what they're what's needed anyways. So I'm only just starting. There's a few different ways you can go through the program. You can go full-time, which is pretty intensive depending if you're working, or you can go part-time and you can break it up either through starting with the master's courses, which is what I've decided to do, or you can kind of combine some of the core nurse practitioner courses with the master's courses, and that would make it again a little bit heavier, but it depends on your lifestyle and what you have going on.
So before this got started, you told me that when you graduate, you actually graduate with a dual sort of credential, correct?
That's right. Yeah. So you'll have the nurse practitioner diploma essentially, and you also have your master's credential. So it didn't used to be a combined program here, but they've since done that in the last few years.
Okay. So if somebody is trying to choose where to go, what are the things that you would recommend that they take into consideration?
As far as working,
As far as like a program, if they're trying to choose an NP program. So you said like this type of specialty, but what other things would you say that students should consider when they're trying to choose?
I think the kind of work you're hoping to do and maybe what the job markets are like where you are is a pretty big factor to consider. So my concern even for myself is that there's not a huge amount of funding right now for the NPs. I think that's all growing and things are changing. But it did impact my decision regarding how quickly I wanted to go through the program, because I do work full time as an RN right now. And I was hesitant to give that up right now when I feel like it might be a little ways down the road where there are more jobs available.
Okay.
So that's one thing to consider. And the type of, depending on where you live, like the type of, whether there's a lot of primary care clinics or whether there's a lot of family health teams that have roles for NPs, those are all things that would impact your ability to get a job at the end.
Okay. I think that's really great advice. Oh, I see a question. Primary care versus acute care. What would you say are the significant differences as far as working as a nurse practitioner?
So between the two programs, so I've only explored primary care because that's all I am interested in. But I did work with an individual who did the acute care program through the University of Toronto. And so she's gone on to work like in an acute care setting, so in the hospital. So she's now employed like with the pain service. So like the goes around like with the anesthetist and manages pain and in acute care settings. Primary care is directed at, it's exactly that. So you'd be working in a clinic, perhaps with other primary care practitioners who are offering almost like this, a similar service of a family physician. You can also work in family health teams where they're buddied up like with social workers, dietitians, any service really, that you can think of in that respect, where they would offer like a holistic kind of care model to patients more so than a specific working in Emerge or working in a heart failure program or something that's very specific to the hospital.
Okay. Now, you mentioned your experience moving into it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but currently to go into a nurse practitioner program, you need 2 years of experience. Is that right?
So I brought up the link here, and I might come off the screen for a minute, but the requirement for enrollment, it's based on hours. So you have to have a minimum of 2 years of full-time practice, or they have in brackets here 3,640 hours of practice, which it was hours that applied to me because I was part-time prior to enrolling.
Okay. And would you say that's enough?
I don't know. I think that depends. So I feel like I was fortunate to come from critical care where I have had lots of different experiences. Like you see so much in there. Not that you don't on other floors. Definitely not to discourage that those types of people from applying, but I feel like it's an asset. It was for me. I don't know how confident people are coming from only a 2 years of experience, sometimes from a ward floor where maybe you're not doing things so intensively. It's hard to say. I feel like for me, I was working almost 4 years before I applied. So I'm hoping that gives me a little bit more of a base than if I had only been working 2 years. I couldn't really imagine myself applying 2 years ago.
So thinking back to what it was like 2 years, students that are thinking of maybe trying to do the minimum requirement, do you think you would struggle if you hadn't been exposed to as many clinical experiences? I guess I'm trying to ask for those students that are thinking about it, should they go after 2 years? And I'm hearing you say that it depends on the type of experience that you have, but
yeah, so you're working in primary care. So obviously, like for myself coming from ICU, it's not going to be the same. But I will have had a lot of exposure to cardiac meds and the usual titration of certain drugs and the things that you would give most often for certain conditions. If you worked, say, maybe in the health unit for all those years, you maybe wouldn't have been exposed to those things, and you're expected to know a lot of that stuff going into the programs, and you have to have like really strong assessment skills. There's like an entry assessment, head to toe kind of thing that you have to complete before you can even enroll. So yeah, you have to be, I think, pretty sharp on like your clinical skills, although you're not necessarily doing those, you're not putting a Foley in the community and that kind of thing. But the expectation is that you're pretty sound at all those things for diagnostic purposes, that kind of stuff.
I think that's helpful advice because these guys are in 4th year and possibly accepting some job offers, and it might influence if they want to go into an NP role, what type of job they pick now, right? To get experiences.
I wouldn't want to discourage anybody from all experience is valuable in some way, no matter what. So it depends exactly where you're applying and what they're looking for and their requirements, I guess.
Okay. So recognizing that there's different types of master's programs, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to feel like, answer me honestly here,
Sure.
Okay? These students are in a research course. How important is your knowledge of research methods and your ability to like construct research proposals and stuff moving into a nurse practitioner's stream program like you're in?
As far, I'm starting with the master's courses specifically, which are the research courses. So the class I'm in now is called Research 1, and it's focusing on quantitative research analysis. We aren't required to do a research proposal, but we are required to look at a lot of literature and decide if it's evidence-based and if it's appropriate for implementation in practice. So we're having to critique a lot of studies and see if they seem appropriate. So I feel, having not been doing that for the last couple of years, I've been a little bit rusty getting started, just remembering validity and all those types of things that you look for when you're reading research. So for this program, you have to get back into those types of things. As far as writing proposals, I don't know what's to come in next semester. I'll have 2 research courses in the winter. The next one focuses on qualitative and healthcare policy. So it's very NP directed. It's less, if you had done just the master's courses by themselves that aren't part of the NP stream, which is probably an option in some places, then you might be more required like a thesis type of stream.
Okay. So as far as you're aware, it's more about the ability to critique studies.
Yeah.
We're hoping the students graduate with, and maybe hold on to a few of those.
Yeah. There's lots of resources though too. Like there's all kinds of stuff to help you get back on track with reading studies and actually reading literature and realizing what's kind of bogus information and what's real and that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. I even remember when I was taking the non-NP version of a master's, some of the courses had some review built into it, right? So yeah. If you go in and you've been exposed to it before, as they have in the program, but you don't remember everything about research, it's probably not as important as having that ability to do the physical assessments in your program, from what I hear you saying, right?
Yeah, and applying things, because there's so many influences now. There's so much media articles and so many, all types of forums where there's information that they provide now, and patients are always seeing those things and looking those things up and coming with questions. I would imagine that you have to try to get them back on track, like with what's the real research out there? What are the real guidelines?
What's the quality evidence?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any questions in the audience? No. Okay. I think you've done a really good job introducing that. Yep. I agree. They're saying that covers a lot. If you have anything to add, go for it. If not, then I'd like to thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, no problem. If anything I left, was vague or not well explained enough, I'm happy you can contact me afterwards and I can let you know whatever I can. I'm still early in the program, so I'm not the expert by any means, but hoping to enjoy the rest of it and, get through in one piece and see where things go from there. So
yeah, it's really nice to hear your experience.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I'm, I didn't consider myself, I'd never ever thought that I probably would go back to school after my undergrad. I felt like nursing school was hard enough. So there's hope. Don't worry.
I think that's a really great message to give the students. And thank you so much for coming today.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
In a second. Okay. These are the things that I'm hoping to cover today. We already heard from the graduate, who is Morgan. I wanted to put on this session as well that we're going to be having a poster day on November 22nd. So people who have chosen to do their research project as a poster should plan to do it that day. If there are issues with that date, please let me know and we'll try and work something out. Those of you that are doing a website, if you want to get feedback on your stuff that day, I will be able to bring in laptops if you want. And what my plan is I want to call it, instead of poster day, celebration of research, and you can engage in that collegial discourse that is part of the course outcomes. My plan is to set it up sort of like a conference, but if you haven't been to conferences before, sort of like science fair, if you can think back to science fair. So there'll be tables around the room with posters for those of you who are doing posters. Now remember, not everybody has to do a poster, so I am going to be bugging you guys in the next few days to figure out exactly who is doing posters so that I can do appropriate planning around that. And we can talk as a group about possibly inviting third-year nursing students to tour through there, or other faculty to come through and give you some feedback on your work as well. I do know that half of the class is in classes on that day. So on purpose, I made it go the full day so that you could attend one half of the day or the other. You don't have to attend for the full day. I also know that some of you may have clinical. I couldn't really do this conference style thing on multiple days to try and accommodate all the schedules. So I'm hoping that I've targeted the people that actually want to do posters. I did it based on student request. So if there are challenges with that day, I want to know within the next few days. So I guess the November 22nd is tentative, but I ran it by faculty. So it's like not extremely tentative. It's slightly tentative. It's basically if students can't attend, if a bunch of the students that can't attend, I'll have to try and schedule a different day. You should be at the point in the course where you are nearing the end of your grade negotiation for the 40% chunk of your mark. I know that there are students that are a little bit behind on that. Some of that has to do with how our schedules line up. So what some students have been able to do, particularly those that have already met with me and gotten some feedback, is, if you got feedback but you didn't really want to negotiate your grade when you got that feedback, what you could do is you could fill out the rubric for the things that you're trying to negotiate the grade for with the numbers, and then I will tell you when I'm giving you your second round of feedback if I agree with the grade that you've assigned yourself. And then either we can do some electronic back and forth, which I've done with a couple of students, or we can set up a meeting to discuss the grade that way. I really need to get the 40% grades assigned in October. So for those of you that haven't negotiated it yet, come the end of October, if we haven't met, I'm going to have to put an estimate in based on the work that I could find for you. So we can do some renegotiation because that is built into the syllabus, but we're kind of getting to the point where you guys should really be focusing on your 60% project. So I want to make sure for everybody's success in the course that we are moving closer to the project than we are looking back at negotiating this 40% component. In order to get feedback on and hand in that project, I'm going to be asking everybody to fill out the academic integrity form, which is inside the course. Oh, I really should zoom this in. Some of you have already done it, academic integrity here. And then when you're ready for feedback on your project, I will have a Dropbox here, the project Dropbox, and I'm going to make it so that this Dropbox only shows up if you have done the academic integrity component. We have talked about academic integrity throughout the program. Basically, this is asking you to agree not to plagiarize. It talks about some of the consequences of plagiarism, which would be a 0. Just to make sure that you're aware of that thing. And I'm hoping that the way that we're designing this course, there's some value in it for you so nobody's tempted to cheat. I think that pretty much covers announcements. The grade negotiation updates was around making sure that we get grades negotiated this month. Okay, no questions so far. Let's talk a little bit about how to incorporate a framework or theory into student projects. So everybody's working on a project. I'm going to throw this link in the chat, and I'm not going to put too much stress on the on the audience today. We can do more of this over the next few days, and then I can pick up on this on Monday. Throw some ideas into this document in terms of how you might use a framework. So think about theory. I mean, you can use conceptual or theoretical frameworks, but if you think about theory, I think it helps a little bit. And for those of you looking for this link, actually, if you click this link, it'll bring you to the document if you're watching this asynchronously. And if you can try and put some ideas in there before Monday, it'll really help with the discussion. While you're thinking about that, I think I'm going to talk about the theoretical frame section of the rubric because it might give you some hints. So a theoretical framework is something that's increasingly being required when research is done to make that explicit. It's used in a variety of ways, and the way that you use it depends a little bit on the type of study that you're doing, which is why in this document I broke it up by qualitative and quantitative uses of a theoretical framework. There are some resources in this, in Learning Activity 7, if you scroll up to the In Preparation section, that talk about how you might use it. I really want you to think about how you might use it in your specific projects. So, one of the ways that theoretical frameworks might be used, and one of the most common ways that it might be used, is to actually justify your question. But you don't have to use it that way. So I think what I'd like the class to do is to think about, if they're not going to use a theory or a conceptual model to justify their question, how else might they use that? One of the books that I've recommended in this course is the Creswell book. Is the Creswell book. There's an older version of this book on reserve. Okay, this is the new version if you would like to go to the bookstore. I don't think that you necessarily need to buy the book. I think that if you Google the use of theoretical frameworks, you'll be able to come up with some suggestions. Or if you're here on campus, maybe a few of you can get together in a group, go to that Google document, put in some ideas about how you might use a theoretical framework in your projects. I'm not going to give you the answers right now, but there's 4 different ways that you might use a theoretical framework according to Creswell in qualitative research. And I have to count the ways in quantitative research. Now people may or may not all agree with Creswell, but there are, according to Creswell, 3 different ways in quantitative research that you might be using it. Probably one of those ways that you've heard of in your previous courses is quantitative research is sometimes used to test a theory. So if your question is about testing a theory, then it would make sense to use that approach. But from what I'm aware of, you guys might not be doing that. So think about, first of all, what is a theory, which you would have covered in your previous research courses, but if you need a refresher on that, take a look at that. Take a look at the different types of ways that you might be able to use a theory in your actual proposals. Throw some ideas into this document, and then we can talk about them in the next class. In terms of the way that theoretical frameworks are going to be graded in this course is this rubric is still in development, but I kind of like the suggestions that we have here. You're going to have to identify your framework. You're going to have to tell me how it's being used in your study. But if you're not using a framework, and there are situations in which you may not use a framework, you're going to have to explain to me why you're not using a framework. So it might be that it doesn't make sense to use a framework in your particular study. Now, Creswell gives a very brief definition in his book explanation in his book about why you might not use it. But if you choose not to use a theoretical framework in your study, I'm hoping that you're able to give me a clear, concise rationale that kind of expands a little bit on what Creswell is saying. How are we doing out there in the audience? Good. All right. I love that we got the video going. For those of you that have not yet contributed to co-construction of a rubric, this is a really good time to do that, because I need to kind of finalize this project grading rubric in the next little while. What I've done is I've taken the project plan rubric and put it in here. I was working with a few people to outline some of the stuff for the theoretical frame section, because that is what was coming next in the course. So this one is close. It's not quite perfect yet. So if you see some things in there that you think could be changed, now is the time. And then if you scroll down for the rest of it, there's some suggestions in there. What you see under the exemplary column is from the rubric from last year. And I don't know if it adequately addresses, if it's clear enough for everything. So if you feel like something in there needs to be improved, please make a suggestion there as well. And then what we'll do is we'll talk through the rubric. And I found that last time when we were co-constructing the rubrics, it really helped to clarify the expectations for the assignments. So we'll work on this. we'll work on this on Monday in a little bit more depth, and then we can hopefully get towards finalizing this thing towards the end of next week. So you'll see, if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, it would be a really good time to look at defining what data collection should look like or what data analysis should look like. Some of the other sections have some comments, which I will go through. I'll go through those soon. I'm prioritizing the grade negotiations right now. I really want to try and get those grade negotiations in. So I am hoping that you guys will reach out to me with whatever challenges you're facing in the course. I think I'm going to close the recorded section of this live session now, and challenge you to reach out to me and tell me what the challenges are that you're experiencing, either via email, or if you're here with me today, I will sit around and answer your questions until we run out of time. So thank you very much for watching this live session. Please, please, please try and contribute to this project grading rubric and your ideas for how frameworks might be used in your studies between now and hopefully the next live session. Thank you.